standing in the middle of Miami International Airport at 11:47 p.m., watching my own son disappear through the automatic doors with my passport, my wallet, and my entire life in his hands. I realized that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones capable of destroying you completely. What I thought was the end of a perfect family vacation in the Caribbean had actually been the final act of the most elaborate betrayal I could have ever imagined. A plan so cold and calculated that it took me 3 days sleeping on airport benches to understand that my own flesh and blood had left me there to die. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Stay with me until the end of this story and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. That way I'll know how far my words are reaching. Thank you. Hello, my name is Walter, and I'm 67 years old. 3 years ago, if someone had told me that I'd be sharing this story with you, I would have laughed and called them crazy. Back then, I was just a proud father and grandfather from the south side of Chicago, a retired steel worker who had spent 43 years at the same plant, saved every penny I could, and was looking forward to spending my golden years watching my grandchildren grow up and maybe taking a few trips to places I'd only seen in magazines. I raised my son Michael as a single father after my wife passed away from cancer when he was 12. It wasn't easy, working double shifts at the steel plant, making sure he had everything he needed for school, driving him to basketball practice even when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But I did it because that's what fathers do. You sacrifice, you work, you give everything you have to make sure your children have a better life than you did. Michael grew up to be everything I thought I wanted in a son. He went to college on a partial scholarship. I paid the rest, graduated with a business degree, got married to a smart woman named Jennifer who was a lawyer, and they gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren. They lived in a nice suburb about an hour from my house, had good jobs, nice cars, the kind of life I had dreamed about when I was working 16-hour days and eating bologna sandwiches for lunch to save money. But looking back now, I can see the signs I chose to ignore. The way Michael always seemed to know exactly how much money I had in my savings account. The way Jennifer would steer conversations toward my finances, asking innocent questions about my retirement plans, my life insurance, what I planned to do with the house when I got older. The way they both seemed so interested in helping me organize my finances and plan for the future. Last December, Michael called me with what sounded like the most thoughtful Christmas gift a son could give his father. "Dad," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Jennifer and I have been talking, and we want to do something special for you this year. We want to take you on a cruise to the Caribbean, all expenses paid, our treat. You've worked so hard your whole life, and you deserve to see some of the world." I was overwhelmed. At 67, I had never been on a cruise, never been out of the country, never even been on a real vacation that lasted more than a long weekend. The idea of sailing through crystal blue waters, seeing tropical islands, spending time with my family in paradise, it sounded like something from a dream. "Michael, that's too expensive," I protested. "You don't need to spend that kind of money on me. Dad, we want to do this. You raised me by yourself. You paid for my college. You've been there for every important moment in our lives. This is our way of saying thank you." When he put it like that, how could I say no? We spent weeks planning the trip. Jennifer handled all the travel arrangements. She said it was easier since she was a lawyer and used to dealing with contracts and paperwork. Michael picked out shore excursions, researched the best restaurants on the ship, even bought me new clothes for the trip because he said I needed to look the part of a man on vacation. The cruise itself was everything they had promised and more. 7 days sailing through the Caribbean, stopping at Jamaica, Cozumel, and Grand Cayman. I snorkeled for the first time in my life, ate lobster and steak every night, watched the sunset from the deck while sipping drinks that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. My grandchildren, ages 8 and 10, were having the time of their lives, and seeing them happy made everything perfect. Michael and Jennifer were attentive throughout the entire trip, almost too attentive. Jennifer insisted on holding onto everyone's passports and travel documents for safekeeping. Michael made sure all the excursions and meals were charged to his room. They wouldn't let me pay for anything, not even a cup of coffee. "This is our gift to you, Dad," Michael kept saying. "Just relax and enjoy yourself." On the last night of the cruise, we had dinner at the ship's finest restaurant. Michael ordered champagne and made a toast. "To the best father a man could ask for," he said, raising his glass. "Thank you for everything you've given us, Dad. This trip is just the beginning of how we plan to take care of you in your retirement." I was so moved I had tears in my eyes. Here was my son, the man I had raised, the person I was most proud of in the world, telling me that I was loved and appreciated. I felt like the luckiest father alive. If I had known that would be the last honest moment I'd ever share with my son, I would have memorized every detail. The way the candlelight flickered on his face, the sound of the waves against the ship's hull, the taste of that expensive champagne. Because less than 24 hours later, my world would collapse in ways I never could have imagined. The trouble started at Miami International Airport, where our flight was supposed to connect us back to Chicago. We had about 2 hours between flights, and Jennifer suggested we grab lunch while we waited. The kids wanted to go to the gift shop to buy souvenirs for their friends, and Michael offered to take them while Jennifer and I found a restaurant. "Actually," Jennifer said, pulling Michael aside, "why don't you take your dad to get some food, and I'll watch the kids in our carry-on bags. I need to make some phone calls anyway, work stuff that couldn't wait." Looking back, I realized that was the moment the trap was set. But at the time, it seemed perfectly normal. Michael and I found a sports bar near our gate, ordered burgers and beer, and talked about what an amazing week we'd had. He seemed relaxed, happy, more talkative than usual. He asked me about my plans for the rest of the year, whether I was thinking about downsizing the house, what I wanted to do with my retirement savings. "You know, Dad, Jennifer and I have been talking about your future. You're getting older, and that big house is a lot for one person to maintain. Have you thought about maybe signing some papers that would make it easier for us to help you manage things if you ever get sick or can't handle your affairs?" I should have been suspicious, but I wasn't. This was my son, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. "What kind of papers?" I asked. "Just some legal documents that would give us power of attorney, maybe make us joint owners on your bank accounts, that sort of thing. Jennifer says it's standard stuff for people your age. It would just make things easier if anything ever happened to you." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable, but I pushed the feeling away. "Let's talk about it when we get home," I said. "I want to think about it first." Michael's expression changed for just a moment, a flash of something I couldn't identify. Anger? Frustration? But then he smiled and nodded. "Of course, Dad. No rush." We finished our lunch and walked back toward our gate, where Jennifer was waiting with the kids and all our luggage. She looked up as we approached, and I noticed she was holding a manila envelope. "How was lunch?" she asked, but her voice sounded different, more formal. "Great," I said. "What's that?" "Oh, just some paperwork I need to review for a case," she said quickly, tucking the envelope into her carry-on bag. That's when I noticed something else that should have set off alarm bells. All of our passports and boarding passes were sitting on the table next to Jennifer, but she was only holding 4 of them. "Where's my passport?" I asked. Jennifer looked confused for a moment, then started digging through her purse. "It's right here somewhere. I must have put it in a different pocket." She searched for several minutes, looking increasingly frustrated. Michael joined in, checking his pockets and bags. The kids were getting restless, and I was starting to feel anxious about missing our flight. "I can't find it," Jennifer finally said, looking genuinely upset. "It must have fallen out somewhere. This is terrible. What are we going to do?" "Let me help look," I said, but Michael put his hand on my shoulder. "Dad, don't worry about it. Jennifer and I will figure this out. Why don't you sit here with the kids while we go talk to the airline? Maybe they can help us figure out what to do." That seemed reasonable. I sat down with my grandchildren, who were showing me the souvenirs they'd bought, while Michael and Jennifer walked over to the customer service desk. I could see them talking animatedly with the airline representative, and Jennifer was showing them papers from her manila envelope. After about 20 minutes, they came back, and Jennifer looked relieved. "Good news," she said. "The airline is going to help us sort this out, but it's complicated. They're going to put you on a later flight, probably tomorrow morning, and they'll help you get temporary travel documents from the passport office here in Miami." "What about you guys?" I asked. "We need to get the kids back home for school," Michael said. "But don't worry, we've arranged everything. The airline is going to take care of you tonight. They'll put you up in a hotel and make sure you have everything you need. We've already paid for it." Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. "Are you sure? I don't want to be stuck here by myself." "Dad, you'll be fine," Michael said, giving me a hug. "It's just one night. We'll pick you up at O'Hare tomorrow evening. Jennifer has all the details worked out." Jennifer handed me a piece of paper with what looked like confirmation numbers and instructions. "Just give this to the airline representative at that desk over there," she said, pointing to a different counter across the terminal. "They'll take care of everything." I looked at the paper, but the handwriting was messy and I couldn't make out all the details. My reading glasses were in my carry-on bag, which Jennifer was holding. "Can I get my glasses?" I asked. "Of course," she said, but then the boarding announcement for their flight came over the loudspeaker. "Oh no, we need to go right now or we'll miss the plane," Michael said, suddenly urgent. "Dad, just take this to the desk. They'll explain everything. We love you, and we'll see you tomorrow night." Everything happened so fast after that. Hugs from the grandchildren, quick kisses goodbye, promises to call me as soon as they landed in Chicago. Before I knew it, I was standing alone in the middle of the airport, watching my family disappear through the security checkpoint. I looked down at the paper Jennifer had given me, trying to make sense of the instructions without my reading glasses. The handwriting was even messier than I'd thought, and some of the words were smudged. I walked over to the desk she had pointed to, but when I got there, I realized it wasn't an airline counter at all. It was just an information kiosk that was closed for the night. Confused, I walked back to the gate where our original flight had been, but it was empty. The plane had already left. I found another airline representative and tried to explain my situation, but when I showed her the paper Jennifer had given me, she frowned. "Sir, this isn't any kind of airline document I recognize," she said. "These look like random confirmation numbers, and this handwriting, I can't even read most of it." A cold feeling started spreading through my chest. "My daughter-in-law said you were going to help me get on a flight tomorrow and put me up in a hotel tonight." The representative shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have any record of that. And without a valid ID or passport, I can't book you on any flights. You'll need to go to the passport office or contact the embassy." "But my son and daughter-in-law just spoke to someone about this 20 minutes ago." "That's possible, but there's no record of it in our system. And our passport office here is closed until Monday." It was Friday night. I spent the next hour going from desk to desk, trying to find someone who could help me or who had spoken to Michael and Jennifer. But everywhere I went, I got the same response. No record of any arrangements, no help available without proper ID, and no way to get on a plane until I could prove who I was. That's when the terrible truth started to sink in. I checked my wallet for my driver's license, my social security card, any form of identification, but my wallet was completely empty except for about $12 in cash. Everything else was gone. I tried to remember when I had last seen my ID. Jennifer had been holding everyone's documents during the cruise, and I assumed she had given everything back to me at the airport. But thinking back, I realized I had never actually seen her return my driver's license or any of my other identification. She had only shown me the passports on the table, and mine was supposedly lost. With growing panic, I tried to access my bank accounts using my phone, thinking I could at least pay for a hotel room and figure out the rest in the morning. But when I tried to log into my banking app, it said my password was incorrect. I tried 3 different passwords that I was sure were right, but none of them worked. The account was locked. I called the customer service number for my bank, but they couldn't help me without being able to verify my identity, which I couldn't do without my ID or by answering security questions about recent transactions, which I couldn't access. That's when I tried calling Michael's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called Jennifer's number. Also voicemail. I tried Michael's work number, but it was after hours. I called their house, disconnected. By 2 a.m., I was sitting on a bench in the airport, using my phone's flashlight to read the paper Jennifer had given me more carefully. Without my glasses, it was still hard to make out, but what I could see didn't make sense. The confirmation numbers were just random strings of letters and numbers. The instructions were just phrases like "go to desk" and "they will help," with no specifics about which desk or what kind of help. It wasn't airline paperwork at all. It was just nonsense written on a piece of paper to make me think I had somewhere to go and someone to help me. That's when I understood the horrible truth. My son and daughter-in-law had planned this. They had taken my passport, my ID, my bank access, and my dignity, and they had left me stranded 1,200 miles from home with no way to prove who I was or get help from anyone. But I still didn't understand why. I still thought it might be some kind of terrible mistake, some miscommunication that we could sort out when they realized what had happened. I spent the rest of that first night calling their numbers every hour, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails, begging them to call me back and explain what was going on. It wasn't until the second day, when airport security started treating me like a vagrant and asking me to move along from the benches where I'd been sleeping, that I began to accept the possibility that this wasn't a mistake at all. And it wasn't until the third day, when a kind janitor named Carlos slipped me a sandwich and told me he'd been watching me for 72 hours and knew I wasn't just some homeless person causing trouble, that I finally admitted to myself the truth I'd been avoiding. My own son had thrown me away like garbage, and I was completely alone in the world. But what I didn't know yet, what would take me weeks to discover, was that the betrayal went much deeper than just abandoning me at the airport. While I was sleeping on those benches, eating scraps of food from airport restaurants, and trying to figure out how to prove I existed, Michael and Jennifer were back in Chicago, systematically erasing my entire life. They had keys to my house. They had power of attorney documents that I had never signed, but that looked official enough to fool banks and government agencies. And they had a plan that was so comprehensive, so coldly calculated, that by the time I found out what they were doing, I would legally be dead. The week I spent thinking I was stranded was actually the week they spent stealing everything I had ever worked for. And the worst part was, I still loved them. Even as I was sleeping on airport floors and begging security guards not to arrest me for vagrancy, I was worried about my grandchildren and hoping their parents would realize their mistake and come back for me. I had no idea that there was no mistake. I had no idea that everything that was happening to me was exactly what they had planned. And I had no idea that the real nightmare was just beginning. Carlos, the janitor who had been watching me, finally approached me on that third day when he saw me crying over a phone call that had gone straight to voicemail. Again. "Sir," he said in accented but clear English, "I don't know what happened to you, but I know you're not supposed to be here like this. You seem like a good man who's in trouble. My shift ends in an hour. If you want, I can take you to someone who might be able to help." I looked up at this stranger, this man who had shown me more kindness in 3 days than my own family had shown me in the past year, and I nodded. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse from crying and exhaustion. "Please, I don't know what else to do." That conversation with Carlos would turn out to be the first step in not just surviving what my son had done to me, but eventually fighting back in ways that would expose the full extent of their betrayal and bring them the justice they deserved. But first, I had to learn how to live as a man who had been erased from existence by the people who were supposed to love him most. Carlos led me through the labyrinthine corridors of Miami International Airport to places I didn't even know existed: service tunnels, employee break rooms, and finally to a small office tucked away behind the international terminal. The sign on the door read, "Elder Services Coalition, Airport Assistance Program. Inside, a middle-aged Latina woman named Maria Santos was finishing up paperwork at a desk covered with case files and coffee-stained forms. "Maria," Carlos said in Spanish, then switched to English. "This is the man I told you about. He's been sleeping in the airport for 3 days. I think his family abandoned him." Maria looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much suffering but hadn't lost their compassion. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, and for the first time in 72 hours, someone was treating me like a human being instead of a problem to be moved along. "What's your name, sir?" she asked gently. "Walter," I said, my voice still hoarse. "Walter Johnson. I'm from Chicago, and I think my son left me here on purpose." Over the next 2 hours, I told Maria everything. The cruise, the missing passport, the fake paperwork, the empty wallet, the disconnected phone numbers. She took notes, asked questions, and never once looked at me like I was crazy or making it up. "Walter," she said when I finished, "I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I've seen cases like yours before. What you're describing isn't just abandonment, it's elder abuse, and it's a federal crime. But first, we need to establish your identity and get you some immediate help." She made a series of phone calls, speaking rapidly in Spanish and English, occasionally putting her hand over the receiver to ask me questions about my social security number, my date of birth, my military service record. Yes, I had served in Vietnam. Yes, I had been honorably discharged. Yes, I had been working at the same steel plant for over 4 decades. "Good news," she said after the last call. "The VA has you in their system, and your service record confirms your identity. That's going to make everything much easier. I'm going to get you into a temporary housing facility tonight, and tomorrow we'll start the process of getting you emergency identification documents." That night, for the first time in 3 days, I slept in a real bed. The facility was basic, more like a homeless shelter than a hotel, but it was clean, safe, and staffed by people who understood that sometimes good people end up in impossible situations through no fault of their own. The next morning, Maria picked me up in her beat-up Honda Civic and drove me to the federal building in downtown Miami. The process of proving I existed was more complicated than I had imagined. Without a driver's license or passport, I had to provide alternative documentation, military records, social security statements, employment history. Fortunately, my 43 years of steady employment at the steel plant created a paper trail that was hard to fake. While we waited for the bureaucracy to work its magic, Maria started making other inquiries on my behalf. She contacted Adult Protective Services in Illinois, filed reports with the FBI's Elder Fraud Division, and reached out to legal aid societies that specialized in crimes against seniors. "Walter," she said during one of our long waits in government offices, "I need to prepare you for what we might find when we start digging into your situation. If your son planned this abandonment, there's a good chance he's been planning other things too. People who commit elder abuse usually don't stop at just one crime." Her words turned out to be more prophetic than either of us realized. The first red flag came when Maria tried to contact my bank in Chicago to report that my accounts had been compromised. After being transferred through 4 different departments, she finally reached a supervisor who seemed confused by her questions. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, "I'm looking at Mr. Johnson's account history, and I see several large transactions over the past week, but they were all authorized by the account holder himself. In fact, Mr. Johnson closed all his accounts yesterday and transferred the funds to a joint account with his son, Michael Johnson." Maria put the phone on speaker so I could hear. "That's impossible," I said. "I've been stuck in Miami for a week. I haven't authorized any transactions." "Sir, I'm looking at surveillance footage of you at our North Side branch just yesterday morning. You were with the younger man, and you both signed the necessary paperwork to close the accounts and transfer the funds." My blood went cold. "Can you describe the older man in the footage?" "Well, sir, he looked just like you. Same height, same build, similar facial features. He had all the proper identification and knew all the security questions. After Maria hung up, we sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. "Walter, I think your son may have used an imposter to drain your accounts. This is much more sophisticated than a simple abandonment case." Over the next few days, as my emergency identification documents were processed, Maria and I uncovered the full scope of what Michael and Jennifer had done to me. It wasn't just theft, it was identity erasure on a massive scale. They had somehow obtained power of attorney documents that bore my signature, though I had never signed them. They had filed a death certificate with the state of Illinois, claiming that Walter Johnson had died peacefully while on vacation in the Caribbean. They had contacted my utility companies, my insurance providers, and even the Social Security Administration to report my death. Most devastating of all, they had sold my house, the house my grandmother had left me, the house where I had raised Michael, the house that contained 40 years of my life, to a cash buyer for well below market value. The sale had been completed just 5 days after they left me at the airport. How is this possible? I asked Maria during one of our investigative sessions at her office. How can someone just declare another person dead and steal everything they own? "It's easier than you'd think," she said grimly. "Your son is listed as your next of kin on most of your official documents. His wife is a lawyer who knows how to make paperwork look legitimate. And most institutions don't do thorough verification when someone reports a death, especially if the person reporting has power of attorney and proper identification." The psychological impact of learning that I had been legally declared dead was almost unbearable. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, trying to prove that I existed while watching everything I had ever worked for disappear into the pockets of people I had loved and trusted. But Maria wasn't just documenting the crimes. She was building a case. She connected me with a federal prosecutor who specialized in elder abuse, a private investigator who worked pro bono for victims of financial crimes, and a victims' rights attorney who was fascinated by the complexity and audacity of what Michael and Jennifer had done. Walter, the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chun, told me during our first meeting, "What happened to you represents one of the most comprehensive cases of identity theft and elder abuse I've ever seen. But here's the good news. Because they were so thorough, they left an extensive paper trail. Every forged document, every fake transaction, every false report, it's all evidence." The private investigator, a former Chicago police detective named Tom Rodriguez, had even better news. "Your son and daughter-in-law got greedy," he told me. "They didn't just steal your money and disappear. They're still in Chicago, living in a luxury condo in River North, driving expensive cars, and throwing parties with your money." Jennifer even posted photos on social media of their new life funded by a sudden inheritance. They think they got away with it. As we built the case against Michael and Jennifer, I also had to rebuild my own life from nothing. The VA helped me access my military benefits, which provided a small monthly income and basic health care. Legal aid helped me challenge the fraudulent death certificate and begin the process of reclaiming my identity. And slowly, painstakingly, I started to piece together not just who I was, but who I wanted to be moving forward. The most difficult part wasn't the bureaucracy or even the financial loss. It was the emotional devastation of accepting that my son, the person I had loved most in the world, had planned my destruction with the cold calculation of a professional criminal. The Michael I thought I knew, the grateful son who thanked me for sacrificing everything for his education, the loving father who wanted to share a dream vacation with his old man. That person had never existed. He had been playing a role, manipulating my emotions, setting me up for the biggest betrayal imaginable. But as the weeks turned into months, and as the evidence of their crimes mounted, something unexpected began to happen. I started to feel not just grief and anger, but a kind of fierce determination I hadn't experienced since my days in Vietnam. Michael and Jennifer had made a critical error. They had underestimated the man they were trying to destroy. I wasn't just Walter Johnson, abandoned grandfathers sleeping on airport benches. I was Walter Johnson, Vietnam veteran who had survived combat and came home to build a life with his bare hands. I was Walter Johnson, steel worker who had spent 43 years solving problems and never backing down from a challenge. And I was Walter Johnson, father who had raised a child by himself and wasn't about to let that child's betrayal be the end of his story. The investigation revealed details that were both heartbreaking and infuriating. Jennifer had been researching elder abuse techniques for over a year, visiting websites that explained how to gain power of attorney over aging parents, how to isolate them from potential help, and how to transfer assets without detection. Michael had been slowly copying my important documents, learning my passwords, and even practicing my signature. Most sickeningly, they had done this before. Tom Rodriguez discovered that Jennifer's own father had died under mysterious circumstances 2 years earlier, officially from a heart attack while traveling alone, but with financial records that showed his assets had been transferred to Jennifer just days before his death. She had perfected her technique on her own father before targeting me. The realization that I wasn't their first victim filled me with a cold rage that burned away the last vestiges of parental love I felt for Michael. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a desperate decision made under pressure. This was their business model. They were predators who targeted elderly parents, and they had gotten away with it before. But they weren't going to get away with it this time. 6 months after being abandoned at Miami International Airport, I was sitting in Assistant U.S. Attorney Chin's office, reviewing the final details of a federal indictment that would bring down not just Michael and Jennifer, but a network of accomplices who had helped them forge documents, launder money, and cover their tracks. "Walter," Chin said, "I want you to understand what's going to happen when we execute these arrest warrants. This case is going to make national news. Your son and daughter-in-law are going to be arrested at their luxury condo in front of their neighbors and their children. The media attention will be intense, and their defense attorneys are going to try to portray you as a confused old man who's mistaken about what happened." I looked out her window at the Chicago skyline, the city where I had worked for 4 decades, where I had raised my son, where I had thought I would spend my final years surrounded by family who loved me. "Miss Chun," I said, "6 months ago, those people left me to die alone and forgotten. They stole everything I worked for, everything I was, and everything I hoped to leave behind for my grandchildren. Now they're living in luxury while posting on social media about their good fortune, and my grandchildren think their grandfather is dead." I turned back to face her. "I don't care about media attention or defense attorneys or any of that. I care about making sure that what they did to me and to Jennifer's father never happens to anyone else. If that means becoming a public example of what elder abuse looks like, then so be it." Chin smiled, the kind of smile prosecutors get when they know they have a witness who won't be intimidated or broken down. "In that case, Walter, let's go make some arrests." The plan was more elaborate than a simple arrest warrant. Because Michael and Jennifer had committed crimes in multiple states and used interstate commerce to facilitate their fraud, the FBI had jurisdiction. Because they had targeted a military veteran, the VA's Criminal Investigation Unit was involved. And because they had stolen from multiple victims, the case would be prosecuted under federal organized crime statutes. But more than that, Chun and Rodriguez had convinced me to participate in something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. A confrontation that would be recorded and used as evidence, but that would also give me the chance to look my son in the eye and ask him why he had tried to erase me from existence. Tom Rodriguez had been monitoring Michael and Jennifer's activities for weeks, documenting their spending patterns, their social media posts, and their daily routines. They had settled into a comfortable pattern of conspicuous consumption, expensive restaurants, designer shopping, weekend trips to luxury resorts. They were living the high life on my money, and they weren't being particularly subtle about it. Jennifer had even started a lifestyle blog called Living Our Best Life, where she posted photos of their expensive purchases, their fancy vacations, and their beautiful condo. In one post, she wrote about how grateful she was for the unexpected inheritance that allowed us to finally live the life we've always dreamed of. Reading that blog was like watching someone dance on my grave while I was still alive. The confrontation was planned for a Saturday evening when Michael and Jennifer were hosting a housewarming party at their new condo, a party funded with my life savings to celebrate a home they had purchased with my stolen money. Tom Rodriguez had been monitoring their communications and knew the guest list, the timing, and even the menu they were planning to serve. I would arrive at the party accompanied by FBI agents, prosecutors, and a camera crew that would document everything for use in court. Michael and Jennifer would be arrested in front of their friends, their stolen assets would be seized, and their children, my grandchildren, would finally learn that their grandfather wasn't dead after all. The night before the confrontation, I sat in my small apartment, paid for by VA benefits and legal aid, and thought about what I wanted to say to Michael when I saw him. For months, I had imagined this moment, dreamed about the look on his face when he realized that his plan had failed, that I had survived, and that I was coming for justice. But now that the moment was almost here, I felt something I hadn't expected, sadness. Not for myself, and not for what I had lost, but for the man my son could have been if he had chosen love instead of greed, family instead of money, integrity instead of betrayal. The Michael I had raised would never have done what this Michael had done. Somewhere along the way, the boy I had loved had died, and this stranger wearing his face had taken his place. Tomorrow, I would get my confrontation, my justice, and my vindication. But I would never get my son back. The next evening, as I walked into that luxury condo building surrounded by federal agents, I carried with me not just the weight of evidence and legal documents, but the knowledge that some betrayals cut so deep that even perfect justice can't heal them. But justice was a start, and after 6 months of being treated like I didn't exist, even imperfect justice felt like a resurrection. 2 years have passed since that night in Chicago when federal agents escorted me into my son's luxury condo and placed handcuffs on the wrists of the two people I had once trusted most in the world. Time has a strange way of dulling certain wounds while sharpening others. The physical exhaustion of those days, sleeping on airport benches, wondering if I would survive, has faded. But the emotional scars remain vivid, etched into my memory like lines carved into stone. And yet, somehow, I am still standing. More than that, I am living a life I never could have imagined back then. In the months that followed the arrests, my days were consumed by hearings, depositions, and endless paperwork. Restoring a stolen identity is not as simple as proving you exist. It is a labyrinth of legal documents, affidavits, notarized statements, and sworn testimony. There were times when I thought the system itself was designed to crush people like me under its weight. But every time I felt myself sinking, I remembered Carlos slipping me that sandwich, Maria refusing to treat me as invisible, and Prosecutor Chin telling me that my story could change lives. Those memories kept me fighting. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt the pieces of myself that Michael and Jennifer had tried to erase. I got my Social Security reinstated, my military records corrected, and even managed to reclaim a portion of my stolen pension. I will never see most of the money they took from me again. Their schemes were too elaborate, and much of it vanished into offshore accounts. But money was never the point. What mattered was reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and my right to exist as Walter Johnson, not as some forgotten ghost scribbled onto a fraudulent death certificate. When the trial concluded, the courtroom was filled with reporters. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, and microphones caught every word as I testified. I didn't speak with anger. I didn't shout or demand vengeance. I simply told the truth about raising my son alone, about trusting him, about the cruise, the airport, and those endless nights on the benches. The jury listened. Some even cried. And when the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I felt no joy, only relief. Justice had spoken, but justice could not return my son to me. In the aftermath, I faced a choice: retreat into bitterness or find a way to transform my suffering into something larger than myself. I chose the latter. With help from Maria and Chun, I founded the Walter Johnson Foundation for Elder Justice. We began as a small group, just a handful of volunteers, a donated office space, and a phone that rang more often with desperate pleas for help than with donations. But within a year, our mission caught fire. Stories like mine resonated with families across America, and suddenly, I was no longer a victim. I was an advocate. Today, I travel the country speaking at senior centers, churches, and universities. I talk about the dangers of financial exploitation, the warning signs of manipulation by family members, and the importance of legal protections. My voice, once hoarse with desperation in that airport, now carries strength and authority. I never expected to become a public speaker, but when I look into the eyes of another elderly parent afraid to admit that their child might be stealing from them, I know why I am here. My pain has become their shield, my story their warning. There is a strange comfort in building a chosen family. Blood betrayed me, but compassion found me. Carlos visits often. He has become like a younger brother to me, reminding me that kindness from strangers can save lives. Maria, who once scribbled notes in a cluttered office behind the airport terminal, now serves on the board of my foundation. She is tireless, fierce, and one of the closest friends I have ever known. Prosecutor Chun checks in occasionally too, not as an attorney anymore, but as someone who believes in the power of redemption through advocacy. Together, they form the circle I never expected but always needed. As for my grandchildren, the truth has been harder. They grew up believing I was dead. When the lies unraveled, the shock was immense. At first, their letters were confused, angry, and full of questions I couldn't answer. Why did their parents do it? Why didn't I stop them? Why had they been forced to live through the shame of seeing their mother and father paraded on national news as criminals? I had no perfect answers. All I could do was promise them that I still loved them, that none of this was their fault, and that I would always be here if they chose to know me. Over time, the walls began to crack. Slowly, tentatively, they have started to come back into my life. Healing takes time. Sometimes, late at night, I lie awake thinking about Michael. Not the man who stole from me, lied about me, and left me to die, but the boy I once drove to basketball practice, the boy who fell asleep in the passenger seat after long games, the boy who laughed when I burned the pancakes on Saturday mornings. That boy is gone. He died long before I realized it, buried under greed and ambition. And yet, some part of me will always mourn him, because mourning him means acknowledging the love I once felt was real, even if he betrayed it. The irony is that the very betrayal that almost destroyed me has become the source of my greatest strength. If Michael had not done what he did, I would never have met Carlos, Maria, or Chun. I would never have founded a foundation that has since helped over 2,000 seniors reclaim stolen assets, escape abusive households, or simply find the courage to speak up. My suffering was real, but it became the soil in which new hope could grow, not just for me, but for countless others. People often ask me how I forgave. The truth is, I haven't, not entirely. Forgiveness is not a single moment, but a long road paved with grief, anger, and reluctant acceptance. Some days, I feel close to it. Other days, the memories cut too deep. But forgiveness is not the same as surrender. I don't excuse what was done to me. I don't minimize it. What I have done instead is reclaim the power it once had over me. My son's betrayal no longer defines me. My resilience does. When I stand on stage in front of hundreds of seniors, I often end my talks with a single sentence that has become my mantra. Family is not only who shares your blood, but who chooses to stand with you when the world turns its back. The room always goes silent. Heads nod. Some wipe away tears. Because deep down, we all know the truth. Love is not an inheritance. It is an act, a choice, a daily commitment. And when blood fails, The heart must find another way to keep beating. 2 years later, my life is quieter but fuller. My days begin with coffee on the balcony of my modest apartment, where I can watch the sunrise without wondering if I will survive the day. I volunteer at the VA hospital twice a week, helping younger veterans navigate the bureaucracy that once threatened to swallow me. I spend weekends gardening with neighbors who have become family. And sometimes, when the mood strikes, I take short trips, not luxury cruises, but simple journeys to places I once only dreamed of. The ocean no longer reminds me of betrayal. It reminds me of survival. If there is one lesson I carry above all, it is this: dignity is not given by money, status, or even family ties. Dignity is claimed, protected, and fought for. They tried to erase me, to write me off as a dead man whose story would never be told. But here I am, telling it, alive, whole, and unafraid. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal of my son was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter. I may have lost a child, but I gained a mission. I may have been abandoned, but I was never alone. And though some wounds never heal, they can still become scars we wear with pride, reminders that we endured, we resisted, and we rose again. As I close this chapter of my life, I leave you with this: never underestimate the strength of the human spirit. We are capable of surviving betrayals that should have broken us, of rebuilding lives from the ashes, and of finding love where we least expect it. I am living proof, because sometimes the cruelest betrayal becomes the seed of the most extraordinary resurrection.